Welcome to the latest episode of the Hunter Baumgart Sports Podcast. My name is Hunter Baumgart, your host. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at HunterBOnAir. Feel free to like the Facebook page as well, Hunter Baumgart Sports. Remember, you can watch or listen to the podcast. You can watch on YouTube, listen on SoundCloud. Simply search Hunter Baumgart Sports Podcast. Well, today and this week took a different turn than I had expected. Of course, we all expected to be watching Game 5 of the Milwaukee Bucks and the Orlando Magic first-round series from the bubble in Orlando on Wednesday. But that took a different turn when the Milwaukee Bucks decided to sit out that game and not play against the Magic in protest. And the Brewers followed suit. So due to that happening in our own backyard here in Wisconsin, I thought it'd be a good time to talk about those things and talk about how do we move forward? How can we make positive change? And to talk about that, I really wanted to get my good friend and fellow UWL graduate, Tyler Behm, on the podcast. And he is like I said, a fellow UWL graduate, communication and broadcasting major, just like me, and also a political science minor. And he has a great perspective on the events of Wednesday with the Bucks and the Brewers both not playing. What does this mean going forward? And also his experience being a person of color in Wisconsin, in Milwaukee, and how people can make changes in their daily lives to make this world a better place, especially with racial inequality, etc. So I think this was a very important conversation to have, and I really wanted to have it this week, and I really thought Tyler Behm would be a great person to talk to, and he definitely will be. So with no further ado, let's get to the conversation I had with Tyler Behm. Joining me on the Hunter Baumgart Sports Podcast is Tyler Behm this week, and we've worked together for a few years at Midwest Family in La Crosse, as well as RAQ Radio and WMCM, both graduated in December from UWL, and he is a fellow broadcast major from UWL, political science minor as well. And so I really wanted to get Tyler's thoughts on kind of what we've seen this week with the Bucks and the Brewers. He lives in Milwaukee, so he is where the Bucks and Brewers have been doing these things. And so I really wanted to get his perspective, and super happy we could here this morning. Tyler, really appreciate the time. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Hunter. How are you?
Doing well, and I appreciate the time, and excited to kind of talk about, I don't know if excited is the right word, but I think it's a meaningful conversation that we kind of need to have at this time, and it kind of for sure hit home for both of us yesterday, which, we're big Wisconsin sports fans. We both hosted sports shows throughout college on the same station, and so these two teams doing what they did yesterday and leading the entire sports world in it kind of really hit home for us. What was your reaction, first of all, when you saw or heard that the Bucks were starting to not come on the floor to play the Orlando Magic yesterday?
So first of all, I actually yesterday, social media at times can be a little draining on you. So I actually yesterday deleted everything.
Okay.
But I still knew that the Bucks played at 3 Central Time, and so I was tuned in to watch the Bucks game. I was watching the Fox Sports Wisconsin broadcast, and then they mentioned that the Bucks weren't coming on the floor. The Orlando Magic were there waiting for the Bucks. There were like 2 minutes left until the game was supposed to start, and the Bucks were nowhere to be found. And then they shared the tweet from Shams Charania that the Bucks were thinking about boycotting the game. And I was like, oh, now I have to re-download Twitter. Yeah, right. I have to go look and see what's going on, because I can't not. And I was shocked, mainly because there wasn't really talk about this from the Bucks previously. Yeah. There was talks about Raptors and Celtics, whose first game I believe was supposed to be played today.
Yep.
About them thinking about it, but there had been nothing about the Bucks. But the more I think about it, the more I become less and less shocked by it. I mean, based on where the national conversation is, it's in Kenosha, Wisconsin, about an hour south of Milwaukee. And for a lot of these Bucks players, it really hits home from them. And Sterling Brown, who is a current Bucks player, in 2018, he was tased when he double parked in a Walgreens late at night. John Henson, former Bucks player, he was locked out of a jewelry store because they didn't want to let a big black man come into their jewelry store. They called the police. John Henson just wanted to buy a watch. This happened in Whitefish Bay, which is real close to Milwaukee as well. And then also Mike Budenholzer, when he was the coach of the Atlanta Hawks, one of his players, Thabo Sefolosha, had his leg broken by New York police, which ended his season. And so it hits home for a lot of these Bucks players. I believe they were the very first team to organize a team protest march in Milwaukee, a protest march that I actually attended.
Mm.
And Sterling Brown was one of the big speakers. Sterling Brown and Kyle Korver were the ones who were speaking. And from what I see, I wasn't up at the front where all the players were, but from what I was seeing, they were listening to the people around them, and they were using their platform for good. And then we marched from Hbsp Forum to Veterans Park, right on Lake Michigan. Sorry, I couldn't remember the name of the lake. And it was awesome. They were talking there, and then a couple protest march met up there, and then we kept walking back towards Hbsp Forum, and it was really a great moment. And so these Bucks, they have been probably one of the foremost NBA teams for creating social change. I know that they led a basketball game at a local prison. I do not remember which prison it was, but it was kind of like a joint effort. They've been working with the Sacramento Kings. They've been doing different events together. And so I know that the Bucks have been at the forefront of this for years now. And so it didn't entirely shock me that they did it. It was just, kind of shocking that it happened with no real warning anyways. And it seemed to kind of, like you said, it kind of just brought the entire sports world to a halt, basically. I know there were a couple MLB games that happened yesterday, but multiple games in the MLB were canceled after the Brewers decided not to play. And it just seemed like this is a moment. It's a big moment. And the NBA was at the forefront of it. The NBA, and specifically the Milwaukee Bucks, were at the forefront of it.
And I want to kind of follow up on that as well. And you say, it's a big moment, and obviously it's huge when a team decides not to play, especially a playoff game, right? That's what you play for all year. They've played literally almost year round now for this, because they had to wait 4 months to get back to the postseason. What does this moment, do you think, signify? Because we have the one game that they're not going to play. Most likely, it sounds like they are going to go and play again on Friday and resume the season in the NBA. And it looks like the Brewers are playing a doubleheader Thursday afternoon. So what do you see as a moment that this can do when, really it might only be 2 days of no games, and then for the Brewers, only 1 day of no game?
Well, first and foremost, I want to say that I support any decision that any players in these sports decide to make. I know that there was some criticism yesterday because the Chicago Cubs, Jason Hayward, decided to take himself out of the lineup. However, the game was still played. But it sounded like Jason Hayward, like he said, like, I'm taking myself out of the lineup. If you guys want to still play, you can. And it sounded like the Cubs players had the support of their teammate as well. And so these players, they're going to get criticized by a lot of people.
Yeah.
Yep. But I don't think it's their responsibility to create the change. They are seeing, however, that whatever leadership has been in power for X amount of years, the change that they want to see isn't creating. And so they are using their platforms that they have worked towards as sports athletes, as role models in their communities, and they're doing whatever they can to create change. And as you can see, the Milwaukee Bucks yesterday, they were trending on top of Twitter for a long time. And they were creating conversations that, people were having conversations on Facebook. I'm sure people were having conversations at work. They were having conversations with their family. I saw that TNT Turner's Kenny the Jet Smith, he walked off the set of Inside the NBA because he wanted to show solidarity with the players. And it really shows that these players are using their moment to do whatever they can. And so, however, they're just players. And I know a lot of people like to claim that these NBA and MLB, NFL players are big multimillionaires. The average NBA player, the average NFL player isn't really making that much money. Now you see Patrick Mahomes making $500 million, right, but the minimum salary in the NFL is less than $500,000, I believe. And so these players, yes, they are making a lot of money, but they're not living large. And so they're using this change, hopefully, to pressure team owners, to pressure organizations that sponsor them to fund things and push for things that they want to see changed. And so as long as that's done, I can't really criticize the players. They're doing what they can.
That's a good point. And I think some people who would maybe criticize this would say, okay, you're not playing a game. No, now, maybe go and do something, right? Go and call, which they did. The Bucks did
Mm-hmm.
call their politicians and some of their leaders, which I thought was
Mm-hmm.
really good because,
Yes.
you can sit in the locker room and protest, but you can also, at that same time, I think it was powerful that they went
Mm-hmm.
and they called the leaders to do that. What did you,
Mm-hmm.
do you agree with that? Do you think it was, because, sitting out a game, I guess, is, it's not going out and donating money, or it's not
Mm-hmm.
like, it's not tangible almost, right?
Yes.
So what did you think of something, a protest that is not necessarily tangible, but could have meaning just by them sitting almost, right?
Yeah.
Just by the discussions that could be had.
Yeah. So for me to create tangible change, there are multiple steps. You need to bring awareness, and then you need a plan of action.
Mm-hmm.
And now these NBA players, they're not social workers. They're not
Mm-hmm.
people who, know the ins and outs of how the world works. But they did what they could. They contacted their specifically the Milwaukee Bucks is who I'm referring to.
Yeah.
They contacted Attorney General Josh Call, and they called him. And I assume Josh Call had some correspondence with either uh, Governor Evers,
Mm-hmm.
and Governor Evers called for an emergency session to be held in the Wisconsin State Legislature.
Mm-hmm.
So something happened.
Yeah.
The Milwaukee Bucks learned from calling that the Wisconsin State Legislature hasn't passed a bill in, I think, over 135 days. During a global pandemic, during these nationwide protests, a bill hasn't been passed in 135 days. And I saw a tweet that was like, for reference, that was from before the first episode of The Last Dance aired. That's how long ago it was. And so they're like, nothing's happening, so we're trying to make something happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what the Milwaukee Bucks did. And then with NBA players, there was a meeting that was held Wednesday night. All players and coaches, and eventually players only, they were talking about what to do. And whatever they decide to do, I'm going to have to support, because they're doing everything they can, and they know the financial ramifications for not playing.
Mm-hmm.
And they know the financial ramifications for playing. And so I feel like as long as they are pressuring their team owners, the ones who have billions of dollars, the ones who can
Mm-hmm.
create meaningful change, not the NBA players can't create meaningful change, but they need to pressure the people who are in charge, and the owners are in charge, because these team owners, they're not just team owners. They own restaurants, they own corporations, they own organizations, stuff
Yeah.
like that. And these team owners and these organizations, they donate, they lobby politically. And so pressuring team owners, and the greatest way to create change is to hit them where it hurts, and that's in their pockets. And so if the players threaten, we're not going to play, you guys want this ESPN, TNT, ABC money.
Mm-hmm.
If they pressure that, then the team owners are going to have to at least listen to the players.
Right, and I think that's kind of hopefully what is happening now,
Mm-hmm.
as they are meeting on this Thursday morning. Tyler Behm joining us here on the Hunter Baumgart Sports Podcast, fellow communication and broadcasting major at UWL, and also political science minor, and worked with me at both the TV and radio station at UWL and Midwest Family in La Crosse. Now, I'm curious, and we talk about what they've done so far, but then of course it's like you said, he called the emergency session. What policies do you think can help? I don't know if we're ever gonna solve all the world's issues, right? The world is there's a lot of issues in the world, but what
Mm-hmm.
specific policies in your mind as a political science minor do you see that can really help the situation that we have going on with racial inequality, and also with police brutality?
So obviously, one that most of people that are going to be focusing on is some form of police reform.
Mm-hmm.
And so whether that be mandating body cameras, whether that be what some people have called for, lowering police budgets and using that money to fund things like education, to fund things like equitable housing for all. Whether that is what it is, then that's what they should be pushing for.
Mm-hmm.
But like I've said, these MLB, these NBA players, they're not policymakers.
Mm-hmm.
But they should have lists of things that they want to see done, and they contact the people who can make the laws and who can make that happen. And so that's what they're using this platform for, is creating the conversation and saying something needs to change. I can't do it myself, so I'm going to stop playing until you do it.
That's a very good point. And I think I think, and a lot of people have thought about that. They aren't the politicians. So like it
Hmm.
always comes back to the politicians. Well, if you get, pressure from the people, then
Hmm.
eventually the politicians should hear you. And I think that's what a lot of people are thinking about. Tyler Behm joining us here on the Hunter Baumgart Sports Podcast. I do want to, ask you personally, being a
Hmm.
person of color in Milwaukee, in Wisconsin,
Hmm.
growing up in Milwaukee and, of course, coming to UWL and living in Wisconsin your life. I'm
Hmm.
curious, what has your experience been like? Just kind of a off the bat question for you.
Yeah. So my family, we lived in Milwaukee, and then when I was about 12, we moved to New Berlin, which is a suburb of Milwaukee.
Okay.
Now, New Berlin is a very predominantly white suburb.
Okay.
I think it's around 94% white, and so my family, we stand out in the community.
Mm-hmm.
And I have seen just the way that me, myself, and my brothers and sisters have been treated differently. Punishments from school. I've had my little brother got suspended from school for a minor offense, and a major offense that another kid got suspended for. They had the same sentence, so to say. They were suspended for
Mm-hmm.
the same amount of time. Or people walking into places like hotels. My little brother walked into a hotel, and he was questioned what he was doing there when he was a resident of that hotel. Um, Things like getting followed in stores. My stepfather was followed in a Menards because they were suspicious of him stealing, and things like that. Just seeing how people treat us.
Yeah.
Racism has no racism doesn't matter whether or not you intend to be racist. You can
Mm-hmm.
very well be passively racist. You can be subconsciously racist.
Yep.
It's recognizing those things and trying to work to become better. About that, I wanted to mention this.
Mm-hmm.
The Milwaukee Brewers yesterday, Wednesday, when they decided to not play, one of the first voices we heard was Josh Hader. And if people know Josh Hader's history, that's significant. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so Josh Hader was whether by choice or by coincidence, he was really the
Yeah.
first Brewers player that you heard talking about things need to change. And so that shows a mindset change. That shows growth in Josh Hader. I heard people that were still mentioning what happened years and years ago with Josh Hader, and all we can ask for is change. And it looks like he's trying.
Mm-hmm.
He's trying to make a change, and that's all we can ask for people. And so that was really that was really important for me to see Josh Hader
Yeah.
being the one speaking. It could have just been that's when his media availability was, but it just worked out that we were able to see the growth in his mindset.
And the part of the punishment, if you will, for what happened and the tweets that were released was, I believe, he went through like a training and kind of like
Hmm.
a learning session
Hmm.
for about the race in America or whatever it happened to be. I can't remember
Hmm.
exactly, but I know he did go through a training, and that was part of what the MLB said he had to do in order for what happened in his case. So I think that shows also the MLB had a part to play in that, which was good,
Hmm.
and that they are kind of moving in a good direction. A lot of us think about, what can we do as people, right? Just, your
Hmm.
regular everyday Joe, like us, and, not being in a position of being a politician or something like that. And I think a lot of people maybe take to social media and they take to,
Hmm.
whether it's Instagram stories or Twitter or Facebook or
Hmm.
whatever it is, and they, post a lot about, race issues, and you kind of see the same posts circulating throughout the
Hmm.
day. And I think for some people, it can be like, okay, it's a lot to take in. You don't read every single post. What do
Hmm.
and social media is something that has obviously taken off in the last few years, and that is a lot of
Hmm.
what we do, especially in a pandemic where we can't see each other. So how do you think people, just everyday people like me, can go about helping this situation, or helping just the world kind of get to a better place than where we are right now?
Um, there's a whole lot of ways that people can help.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the one that is the most obvious is money, but I know like
Yeah.
not everyone has money. I don't have
Mm-hmm.
money. It's really
Mm-hmm.
hard for me to be able to donate to organizations that I
Yeah.
support because I just don't have the financial stability to do that, and that's
Mm-hmm.
understandable. But people can volunteer. Right now, it's kind of hard in a global pandemic, but you can
Mm-hmm.
volunteer. But one of the easiest things to do is to amplify different voices.
Okay.
If you want to be able to help amplify the voices of the people who have been marginalized in their
Mm-hmm.
communities, and listen to them. You can amplify them without listening, but the important thing is you listen to them. You actually care about what they're saying and listen to them, because you can share all the social media stories you want, that you may think you're making a change, but if you're not listening to them, if you're not intaking what people are saying,
Mm-hmm.
listening to the experiences of people who don't look like you, and listening to the experiences of people who didn't come from where you came from, and take them in and try to change your personal actions, recognizing whatever you may have done. And I'm saying you, not as in you, Hunter
Yeah,
Baumgart,
yeah,
but
no, yeah, yeah, yeah.
just recognizing all these things and trying to become a better person, trying to grow. That is one of the best things that you can do. And then obviously the one that people have been saying for a long time is voting.
Mm-hmm.
This that's where you can make your voice heard.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if you have one Twitter follower, if you have no Facebook friends, you can go out and vote, and your vote counts the same as you and me. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's where you can make your voice heard and do whatever you want. And so those are the things that I would feel like the everyday average Joe can do to
Mm-hmm.
help change things.
And I'm curious a little more, like as a person of color, like as far as, and you talk about how your family has seen it firsthand being treated differently, and like how can us, as regular people who don't maybe try to, like you said, you can be subconsciously racist, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can not even know you're doing something that is racist. Is there
Mm-hmm.
things that people can do to start, or people can think about more just in their everyday life, even going to the store, interacting with people at work, that can maybe help the situation and not make people feel marginalized, or that we're treating other people with disrespect. I mean, it comes back to respect, really. I mean, if you think
Yeah.
about, it comes back to just respecting other people.
Mm-hmm.
But what can we do, even if to try to prohibit that subconscious, racist things? People aren't necessarily racist, but they may be doing things that people wouldn't even notice that they are.
Mm-hmm.
So is
Yeah.
there something that comes to mind when I ask you that question?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to say that I can't make other people care about other people. And
Yep.
so if there are people out there who just don't care, there's not much I can do.
Yep.
And it's the harsh reality of this world, but
Yeah.
it is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But recognizing that some actions may have consequences that either you didn't intend or you didn't know you intended. You may remember the story about the woman who called police on a bird watcher, I believe, in
Mm-hmm.
Central Park in New York.
Mm-hmm.
She may not have been a person who she believed was overtly racist, but
Mm-hmm.
she, somewhere in the back of her mind, she knew what calling police could potentially lead to.
Mm-hmm.
And so doing something like that, knowing that the, the tensions between Black people and police historically, that may be one of the reasons why she did call police subconsciously. And
Mm-hmm.
so recognizing your actions, and it's hard to do, it's
Yeah.
hard for people to change their mindsets.
Mm-hmm.
But hopefully with things like what the NBA and MLB are doing, trying to shed light to the subject. And I just want to make it clear, when I say the
Yeah.
NBA and the MLB, I'm talking about the players. Um,
Yeah.
the Milwaukee Bucks players decided to not play Game
Mm-hmm.
5 on Wednesday, and then the NBA afterwards decided to postpone it.
Yeah.
Um, the Milwaukee Bucks players, and then eventually the players of the other teams who were saying they weren't going to play,
Mm-hmm.
they were the ones who brought upon this change. Now the NBA still wants these games to be played,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's why they might postpone them. Same thing with the MLB, but they were the ones who drove this change.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to make that distinction clear.
Yeah, yes, for sure. And I think it needs to be clear, because it was the players. We saw when the Bucks came out of the locker room and made that
Mm-hmm.
statement that it was player driven, and
Mm-hmm.
it was, you could see it in the
Yeah.
emotion of George Hill and Sterling Brown when they made that
Mm-hmm.
statement as well. Super powerful. If people haven't seen it, go and watch the video of
Yeah.
the statement that the Bucks came out and made. And I really like how they
Mm-hmm.
did that. They didn't take questions. They just said, "Here's our
Mm-hmm.
statement. Here's
Yeah.
why we did what we did." And there you
Mm-hmm.
go. Did you happen to keep watching Fox Sports Wisconsin yesterday afternoon? Because
I did.
because that was one of the most kind of powerful, could be a word, but just for a
Mm-hmm.
breaking news, and this as a broadcast person, but for
Mm-hmm.
a breaking news situation, to have it, unscripted, you didn't know it was coming. They're preparing for a
Mm-hmm.
game to start at 3. All of a sudden, you've got to go an hour, And it was Marcus Johnson, Jim Paschke, and Zora Stevenson. What they did to me was incredibly powerful and incredible.
Yeah.
And just putting things into perspective in the conversations that they had. Did you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Jim, Marcus, and Zora, Craig Kashan, Steve Novak were all the people on the broadcast. And I think another thing that even added a layer of difficulty was they were all in Milwaukee.
Yeah.
They didn't know what was happening in Orlando. They had no clue. Now, I'm sure like they're getting texts and they're getting calls from the few Fox Sports Wisconsin members who are in Orlando, but they had no idea what was going on. And so they just had to go off the script. And for them to be able to speak so clearly, but also still have such emotion in their voices, especially Jim, Marcus, and Zora, they were outstanding. And it was really powerful to see that. And especially for someone like Zora Stevenson, this is her first year doing this. And so it was awesome to see. I was also reading fantastic things about what was going on NBA TV. However, I wasn't watching.
Yeah, me either. Yeah.
And did you happen to see the on TNT, Chris Webber, who was planning to call one of the games?
I have not watched it yet, but I'm going to.
Chris Webber, and it's hard when you're emotional. It's really hard to speak clearly. And so I applaud everyone who was a part of that, because I heard nothing but great things about all the broadcasters who had to deal with this situation. Like whether or not they agreed with it, they were in this position where now we have to talk about it. And that ripples from part of what the Bucks were planning to do. All these broadcasts about, and anyone who just tuned in to watch a basketball game, now they're watching something different. And
that is big, because you could have done, and a lot of these stories, like you said in the beginning, we didn't hear anything about it until at game time. And a lot of these stories, like we heard about Boston and Toronto, maybe we're going to boycott, but we didn't hear anything. This was not leaked at all. And for that to be the case, and everybody to sit down, they knew at 3:00, maybe people even left work early to watch this game. Then they watched that. I think it was, like you said, that's very powerful.
They had all the eyes in the world on them, and the Bucks forced this conversation. They forced these conversations to be had, whether intentional or not. I'd like to believe it was intentional, but who knows? But that's what happened, and that, I think, is part of why they decided to not do it.
Exactly. Well, Tyler, I really appreciate you coming on in short notice and all the perspective that we were able to get from you, and just talking about the different sports topics. On a random different note, since this is a sports podcast, if the NBA does resume like it looks like it's going to the Bucks, are they going to win the championship?
Oh man, they haven't given me a whole lot of confidence recently.
Right?
Now, George Hill, he said, I believe after Game 4, that the Bucks, they weren't in necessarily the groove that they were mid-season. And I think this bubble, it creates a different environment. I think almost every team that we see is not the same team that we saw before the season ended.
Some are better, some are worse.
And the Lakers, they had their struggles in the seeding games just as well as the Bucks. And a team like the Pacers, who were looking amazing in the seeding games, turn around and get swept by the Heat. So who knows what's going to happen? I know the Heat scare me, specifically Duncan Robinson. I don't like him. I've never seen him miss a 3-point shot. I don't think it's ever happened.
Probably not.
But
No.
I think the Bucks have the talent, and they have the ability to get there. A person who does scare me a lot is Mike Budenholzer, because he has been very reluctant to make adjustments.
Yeah.
And even in games where the Bucks have been losing, close playoff games, but is still throwing out all bench lineups. And I understand, yes, our depth helped us win a lot of games in the regular season, but that's because our depth was beating the depth of other teams. Now, if the Magic are only playing 8 players, maybe the Bucks should adjust. I think they can do it. I think it's going to be very stressful, and I'm looking forward to it, but I'm also not.
Yeah, exactly. It might cause us a little more stress than, than we anticipated because yeah,
Yeah.
obviously through that regular season they're unstoppable, and then they look to be a little stoppable now. So we'll have to see. It might be a little
Yeah.
more stressful than we anticipated. Well, Tyler, once again, I really appreciate the time and really appreciate you coming on and sharing experiences and your thoughts on what is going on in our world. And I think it's a very important conversation that I wanted to have with you today. And I just really appreciate it. It was great to talk to you.
Thanks for having me. I always love talking to you, Hunter.
Well, thanks so much. Talk to you soon. That is Tyler Behm, fellow UWL graduate, joining us on the Hunter Baumgart Sports Podcast. And like I thought, just a fantastic conversation, and just one that I thought really needed to be had. And when sports and our real world almost intersect, I think it's important for us to cover it. It's important for us to have these conversations. And Tyler offered perspective that was even better than I expected. I knew he would come on and be a great guest and offer some great perspective, and I absolutely love just listening and learning. I think that is such a, and he mentioned this too, the ability for us to listen, to learn from other people, and just be better human beings in that respect, and not always touting my opinion. I could come on here and have a 20 to 30 minute and telling my opinions on the NBA and what they did and what the Brewers did and what the Bucks did, but no, I wanted to listen. I wanted to learn about Tyler's experiences, what he thought of the Bucks and the Brewers, being a lifelong Wisconsin sports fan, being a lifelong Wisconsinite, and thinking about what we can do to, stemming from what happened with the Bucks and Brewers, what we can do to make the world a better place. So I really appreciate Tyler coming on in short notice and providing some great, beautiful, eloquent insight onto what is going on in our country today, and specifically in our own backyard in Wisconsin. So again, appreciate it, Tyler, and I am honored to call him a friend as well. So once again, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at HunterBeOnAir. I will give you updates on the upcoming podcasts, including next week we are going to be talking some Packers football with a fantastic guest, so we'll get back into sports then. But in the meantime, I said this back in June when this was on the forefront, but compassion, love, respect, empathy, and listening. Okay, it's 5 different words there, but having compassion for each other, love for each other, respect each other as just fellow human beings. That's what we are. And of course, having empathy, and of course listening to each other, and just listen to the different opinions out there, not speaking as much, maybe doing more listening than speaking. So I really appreciate Tyler's time, appreciate you taking the time to watch or listen to this podcast. You could watch on YouTube, listen on SoundCloud, simply search Hunter Baumgart Sports Podcast. And I appreciate everyone for watching or listening to this one, because I think it was very powerful and insightful for me as the host, and I hope it was for you as the viewer or listener as well. Talk to you next week, and as always, stay positive.